Hi everyone, I'm glad you could join us today. My name is Annie Pettit and I'm the Chief Research Officer at Peanut Labs. Now most of us have written so many surveys that we really understand all the problems behind them. But today I'd like to talk about surveys from the other side of the mirror. I'd like to share with you what research responders say about us. Now I'm going to focus on three things. First, as a research community, are we being good citizens? Are we treating people well? Are we being respectful to people during the research process? Second, I'd like to share with you how responders react to us, including the good, the bad, and the ugly. And finally, I'd like to share some things we can do to make the survey experience better for the people who make our work possible. So just a few quick notes on the methodology here. I gathered a few 100,000 opinions from social media, and I also gathered survey data from people sampled and weighted to the US Census figures just for convenience. Now, one thing to note about the survey is that I had to use some very specific instructions. I was going to be asking people about behaviors they knew were wrong, and they might feel uncomfortable admitting to those kinds of things. So on a number of the questions, I specifically told people that their account would not be penalized, that I really needed them to be as honest with me as they possibly could. All right, so the first topic I'm going to review is trust. And I don't mean whether we trust our panelists. What I really mean is whether panelists trust us. So here are just a few comments that I collected from the social media data. You'll notice that people specifically wonder if Gallup, Opinion Outpost, Ipsos Synovate, they wonder if those companies are legitimate. And in the thousands of other comments that I collected from social media, every single research company is mentioned, even mine, even Peanut Labs. So you and I know these companies are legit, but the average person has absolutely no idea. There are so many fake and legitimate companies and websites that it's practically impossible for people to know what to believe or who to believe. So using the survey, I asked people how they know which survey companies to trust. And this chart shows you the more popular options chosen from a list that I put together. It's interesting to see that no credit card is the top indicator. Actually, that's kind of disappointing. It reminds me that there are a lot of companies out there hijacking words like surveys and focus groups just to get people to buy things. You can also see that receiving the incentive is an important indicator. Now in this case, people don't mean being promised an incentive. They mean actually receiving it in their hands. We all know that web links break and glitches mess up our system. But when those glitches mean people do not get their incentives, it automatically makes people think that we're scammers. But there are a few easy things we can do. We can remind people that we are not selling anything, that we're not asking them to buy anything, and that we don't want their credit card information. And we can also be very careful about how we phrase the purchase intent question. That shows up on nearly every market research survey we do. And many people really do misunderstand that question. They feel that it is asking them to buy something. Now, fortunately, it's easy enough for us to address that problem. We can simply phrase the question a little bit differently by saying something like, now I'd like to hear your opinions about the things you might or might not buy. Just clarifying that it's not an outright request to buy. Now, the next topic I'd like to address is the dreaded survey length. I'm sure no one listening now writes surveys that are more than 10 minutes long, so maybe this doesn't apply to you, but I'll go ahead anyways. So here we have just a few comments, again, that I've collected from social media about survey length. As you can see for yourself, most people use very few words to tell us that our surveys use far too many words. And they do it with really colorful language that you probably rarely see on surveys. So let's not fool ourselves into thinking that surveys can be as long as we need them to be if we just do a good job writing them. You know, a long survey is a long survey no matter how fun and exciting you think it is. So one of the problems with survey lengths is our promise to survey responders. We tell them that surveys will be a certain length, but they rarely are. We calculate survey lengths based on average completion times, not based on each individual's expected completion time. So if someone always takes a long time to answer surveys, the estimated times will always be wrong to them, and that makes us look. We really need to do a better job of explaining that surveys might take longer or shorter for people, as well as why they might be shorter or longer. All right, the next topic is lying. For the most part, I really don't think research participants plan or want to lie. Sure, there are a few who come in with less than honorable intentions, but those people really are the minority, and our data quality systems generally find those people pretty quickly. So here you see a few examples of both of those kinds of people. Even in social media, where anyone can read what you're writing, people will confess to being less than truthful. We see a few people who have discovered that certain demographics are highly sought after. And there's also a couple of people who confess to feeling uncomfortable about answering truthfully. So on the survey, I asked people outright if they have ever lied on a survey. And this is one of the questions where I said, please, 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 give me a truthful answer. We won't penalize your account. So first of all, notice that 27% of people confess to lying. And let me be a little more specific here. This does not mean that 73% of people do not lie on surveys. It means that 27% of people felt comfortable enough to confess. I would bet you that there are still more people who do lie, but they really just didn't want to confess. We also saw different confession rates based on demographic data. For instance, about 60% of people who said they were black confessed to lying. About 45% of people aged 18 to 24 confessed. And it goes on. Now, of course, it does make you wonder whether to trust these data. If people are confessing to lying, maybe they lied on these demographic questions. It's really quite hard to say. So in the survey, I also asked people why they lie on surveys. And there are three kinds of reasons here. Now, sadly, the first reason is our fault. The answer they wanted to give wasn't there. And this is where we forgot to put a 0 in the frequency option, or where we asked which grocery store they shop at most often and they literally never go shopping, or we chose not to include genderqueer in addition to male and female. These are our mistakes, deliberate or not deliberate. The second type of reason reflects good faith responders. These people want to do a good job, and they generally try to do a good job, but sometimes it just doesn't happen. So in the chart, you'll see about 15% of people said they were in a rush. About 12% of people said they were tired. And about 14% of people said they just didn't know why they lied that time. And then, of course, we have the third group of people, the ones who admit they don't always try to do their best. You can see about 30% of people admit to trying to qualify for surveys. And about 9% said they've had fun taking surveys. And fun doesn't mean it wasn't enjoyable surveys. It means they were poking a little fun at the survey process. These are the kinds of people our data quality practices are designed to detect. We also ask people to confess about a number of other behaviors. People are not as perfect as what we want to believe. 25% of people admit to taking surveys while distracted, and 23% say they answer too quickly. Now, some of these issues can be traced back to the person, the researcher, who wrote the survey. Someone who says they don't know something when they really do is saying the survey was boring, or they thought it would suddenly be longer if they admitted to knowing something. So people are human. They make mistakes. They get bored. We have to remember this when we're writing surveys. Now, fortunately, many cases of lying, if we want to call it lying, can be easily solved. We know generally answering surveys in good faith. The problem is they can't find an answer that applies to them. So we can solve this problem right now, very easily, and for free. All we need to do is review every question in our surveys and make sure there are absolutely no missing answers. Just stare at those questions and try to find a way to answer it so that your answer is missing. And after a while, you'll be really great at finding those mistakes, at finding places that are missing an appropriate answer. As researchers, we really like to think that we're transparent as much as we possibly can be, but let me take you through a few examples before you say you are being as transparent as you can. So every survey we write has demographic questions, sometimes up to 20 different demographic questions. To you and me, the reason for this is obvious. But to many people taking surveys, they just can't imagine what we would do with that information. Even worse, as you see in the second comment collected from social media, when we work extra hard to make sure our questions are comprehensive and fully inclusive, our hard work makes it even worse for people to understand what we're doing. People are also really keen to talk about screening in social media, and they focus on two main topics. First, why are they being screened out? Are we cherry-picking good opinions? And second, why did we wait so long to screen them out? Did we really need to force them through 10 minutes of the survey before we screen them out? So I followed up these kinds of concerns in the survey. I asked people if they knew what surveys meant when they used these words. Sadly, more than 30% of people do not know what it means when we say, "Sorry, this survey is now closed." Nearly 20% of people don't know what it means when they tell them they've been screened out. And more than 10% of people do not know why we ask for demographics. And more than 10% of people don't know what it means when we tell them they've been disqualified. So let me ask you again, do you think we are being transparent with people who take our surveys? Because they certainly don't think so. They would understand what these words meant if we were being transparent. Now, fortunately, it is easy to actually be transparent instead of just thinking we're being transparent. Telling people that we're using the demographic data to classify and categorize data is pointless. It's research speak that only we understand. What we can do is truly explain the word. For instance, it's easy to say, please share your demographic information so that we can better understand how groups of people differ. Or you could say, please share your demographic information so that we can make sure we've listened to many different types of people. Both of these are true, and both of these are transparent, meaningful sentences. There are better ways for us to deal with screening too. We need to do a better job of screening people out as early as we possibly can. Now keep in mind that some people answer surveys slowly, and some people will end up on the long side of the logic skips. So we need to make sure that the questions we absolutely don't have to delay them to later on in the survey. And of course, when we must screen someone out, we need to tell them exactly what's going on. It's just not nice to say, sorry, but you have screened out. Actually, I find that kind of rude. What we can do is explain that you've heard from many other similar kinds of people, and we want to make sure that we hear from a variety of people. Again, it's true, it's transparent, and it's meaningful. So a couple other things we can do for screening. First, evaluation is appropriate. Let people know that they might be screened out because they do use a product or because they do not use a product. Right now, when people try to qualify for surveys, they select every answer option they can. Yes, 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 yes. They'll tell us they use every single product in the list because they believe this will get them more surveys and therefore more incentives. But we know that's not always the case. Their wrong assumptions about the research process lead to wrong data for us. We need to get them to answer more truthfully, and one of the ways is to make sure they understand screening in and screening out. All right, now on to incentives. I know we all wish we had bottomless pockets so that we could give out really great financial incentives, but that's just not the world we live in. Now, first of all, let's remember that even though most incentives are really quite small, people who take our surveys earn those incentives. They've poured through your boring questions, your misleading questions, your incomplete questions, and your really long questions for a reward that is often just a few pennies. And sometimes those few pennies are the best thing about the survey they just took. So on the survey, we asked people about their favorite incentives. Now, obviously, money ranks first, number one. Cash is king. But they also like free products and samples and points. All of these incentives help counteract the boredom of the surveys we write. Now, I know I keep harping on about how boring our surveys are, but really, let's face it. Unless you are a tire manufacturer or a tire collector, you really aren't interested in a 20-minute tire survey. In many cases, the only person truly enjoying the survey is the brand manager. There is no way we can only send surveys that people will personally enjoy. But there are a number of ways we can reduce the boredom factor. For instance, we need to stop being so strict on grammar. You can end a sentence in a preposition. This is how people speak in real life. It sounds normal and natural. And once you make it grammatically correct, it sounds weird. Into what group do you fall? Sounds strange compared to what group do you fall into? You can also use more casual language. You don't have to say things like, please indicate why you feel positively towards this product. Your questions can be phrased in the same way you would chat with your friends. And if you're brave, you can even throw in a few light jokes. I don't mean that you should literally type out jokes and space them randomly throughout the survey. I simply mean that when the phrasing is already in the survey, when it can be lightened up a little, take a few liberties. In an answer option that says 0, you might want to say 0, zip, zilch. Or for an answer option that says 10 or more, maybe you could say 10 or more, I'm addicted. You know, just a few light-hearted comments throughout the survey can make a big difference. Obviously, you're going to avoid politics, religion, anything iffy, but that does leave you a lot of room. All right, so the last thing I'm going to talk about are responder thoughts. As part of the survey, I ended off by asking people about their opinions of this survey. And as you can see here, people really did appreciate being asked. Most people really did want to do a good job. So as we've seen, we need to do a better job of helping people understand how we talk about surveys. There are better ways to talk about screening, disqualifying, completing, and closing surveys. I know some people will be concerned about compromising the research methodology, but we really can be more transparent without negatively impacting the research process. We also need to do a better job of writing surveys. We can make them more interesting just by lightening up our words a little. We don't have to be so grammatically perfect. We can include a little light humor now and then. And lastly, we need to remember that we can't treat our data as if it's perfect. For the most part, none of us are using probability samples, so margin of error is out the window. And as we've seen here, there are many non-sampling errors in survey data. We need to remember that survey data guides hypotheses. It guides decisions. It suggests ideas. It's not error-free. But if we do a better job of writing surveys, they will be less annoying to people taking them, and there will be fewer errors. So listening to research responders is better for all of us. And with that, I'd like to say thank you for joining in, and I hope you heard a few interesting tidbits that got you thinking.